for peace that I have staged at various locations around the USA, most notably on the launch lids of nuclear missile silos in Arkansas, Missouri, and North Dakota. So I was jailed for all of that. You go over the fence, you go over the security fence, and there is a price to be paid. However, I determined that the price that we all would pay collectively, were there to be a shooting nuclear war, would be far higher than the price that any one man would pay being arrested, handcuffed, chained, criminally tried, publicly ridiculed, jailed, imprisoned, etc. That is a heavy personal price, and I won't sugarcoat
Very heavy, Rich.
I won't pretend it's easy. It's hard, but you know what? It's as nothing compared. If you want to know what hard is, contemplate the possibility of living through, if that can even be said, a global nuclear war. I shudder to think of that type of situation. So I have arrived at this conclusion, and it's implicit in what I have done and said over a 3-decade period. I went over the fence onto a nuclear missile silo in Arkansas in 1981. So I've done this over a 30-year period up into my mid-50s. At the age of 55, I went over a security fence onto a nuclear missile silo. So if there are people out there listening saying, "Oh, but I'm middle-aged," that's for a guy in his 20s. Oh, yeah? So the nuclear power plants have to go. How many of them have to melt down before we get that message? We have 3 melting down right now. 4, actually, if you count Chernobyl in the Ukraine, which already blew up back in the 1980s. Add to that the 3 in Japan, and it looks like we possibly might have 2 in Nebraska along the Missouri River any day or week soon. They're skating on the fine edge right now. So how many do there have to be before we get serious about this? So the nuclear power plants have to go. Ditto. In the case of missiles, they have to go. Either we get rid of them, or they're going to get rid of us. Coexistence is simply not a viable option. It's us or them. This really is the case, where it's one or the other. Long term, we cannot coexist, and perhaps not even short term, as the northern hemisphere continues to be more and more radioactively contaminated by the ongoing nuclear reactor meltdowns in Japan. So I am suggesting that concerned individuals use any and all peaceful, creatively, nonviolent means and methods at their disposal, individually and collectively, to hasten the day when nuclear missiles and nuclear power stations are relegated to historical footnotes. They have to go, but the problem is that the powers that be will not voluntarily get rid of them. Look what TEPCO is up to at Fukushima. Look what the government of Japan is doing. They're just lying. They're heavily in denial. They're temporizing. They're trying to protect the nuclear power industry. So they are, the powers that be, the big corporations, TEPCO, General Electric, the governments of Japan, the governments of the United States, the Pentagon, they're not going to voluntarily get rid of nuclear technology. They won't do it. So if these things are going to disappear from the face of the earth, it will be through our actions. If they do not disappear from the face of the earth, that will likewise be due to our inactions. So that's our choice. The next move is clearly ours. We see what TEPCO is going to do. Nothing. We see what the Pentagon is going to do. Nothing. So I strongly advise that whatever we do, that it be creatively non-violent. The machine, this sprawling, vast, planet-strangling machine, human race enslaving machine that I have discussed and talked about in my writings and interviews, doesn't understand nonviolence because it's foreign to its nature. And so it is our ace in the hole. Creative nonviolence, therefore, is an idea whose time has come, and we had some excellent forerunners in the 20th century, which we could talk about a little bit later in this interview if you like. Those being the White Rose movement in Nazi Germany during the Nazi period, World War II, and the Gandhi movement,
yes,
led by Mahatma Gandhi in India in the 40s and 50s, in the 30s and 40s, and also the nonviolent movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King and others, mostly in the American South in the 1950s and 1960s. And those were wonderful teaching moments for us. Shame on us if we don't take those three powerfully instructive, creatively nonviolent examples and adapt them to the very dire and pressing moment in our time. That said, the machine will lash out with, I'm telling you because I've personally experienced this, with handcuffs, chains, jail cells, prison cells, police, guns. Now they're using tasers. You name it. They're going to use it. They have it, and they will use it. So I don't and I won't minimize the violence that the machine and its minions can and do employ to preserve their power. They are ruthless. So that's the caveat. Creative nonviolence is for clear-thinking, courageous adults. It's not for the faint of heart. I repeat, I personally have spent more than a year and a half of my life in 12 different jails and prisons in 5 different states as a consequence of my nonviolent peace demonstrations. I've been handcuffed and chained more times than I can remember, and I've been locked into dozens of jail and prison cells, so many I can't remember all of them anymore either. So I won't minimize the enormity of the task that is in front of humanity. At the same time, I won't minimize the horror, and I emphasize the horror that confronts us if we fail to undertake this enormous task and succeed at it. So failure to act at this crucial juncture in history is not an option. That is why I went over the security fence at nuclear missile silos in North Dakota last year, in Missouri, back in the 1980s, and also in Arkansas, back in the 1980s. And having said all of that, I can't do it all by myself, and I shouldn't, and I absolutely will not. Others positively have to step forward, and I mean millions of others just have to. If they don't, we are pretty well toast. So now is the time. And I'll go further and say, if you were waiting for the time to act, if you were waiting for someone to tell you, you know what, it's time to do something, because 20 years from now it will be too late. It'll all be over by then, but the crying. 10 years from now it's too late. 5 years from now it's too late. 3 years from now it's too late. 2 years from now it's too late. This year. My God, the nuclear power plants are melting down. How deep into this do we have to go before people see it's a full-blown planetary crisis? Now is the time to act. Now is the time for all good women and all good men to come to the aid of their planet and to come to their own assistance. The powers that be will not be helping you. They will not be helping the planet. You will have to help yourself. You will have to help your home planet because others are destroying it, and if you don't come to its aid, no one will. Now, in terms of karma, yeah, that means that there is a heavy karmic load. And I arrived at the point where I made the decision, and as a young man already, continuing right up into my middle age, into my middle 50s, that either you face it now in this lifetime, or you turn away and delay facing it until a future lifetime, and it will be even heavier. So much heavier, and so much harder, because we see if we don't nip this in the bud, we should have nipped it in the bud decades ago. We didn't. So now that radioactive flower is beginning to blossom in our lifetime on our home planet. So if we turn away now, you know what, and say we're reborn, as many people believe we do, it does happen. Say you do reincarnate and you are reborn, you're going to be reborn onto a hell planet, onto a radioactive hell planet, to deal with the karma in that radioactive hell life that you didn't face now. So delaying failure to act, to my mind, is not an option. There's a planet to save while we still can, if we still can. There's a moment. There's a window of opportunity. Either we avail ourselves of it or we don't. So, as I've said repeatedly, and I will say again, one of the very best ways to do this is via creative nonviolence. And I think it's essential because what the problem is destructive violence, rampant destructive violence. So logically, the antidote to destructive violence is creative nonviolence. That's the way you balance the karma. It's not so much a question of destroying karma as it is of balancing it and diffusing it. Leaderless, decentralized, spontaneous, creative, non-violence. There are so many ways to do this. In fact, as many ways as there are individual people. I actually think that one of the best ways is to quietly withdraw your participation and your cooperation from the system that the machine has put in place. So simply cease to cooperate. Creatively, for example, withhold your money from it. Withhold your votes from it. See, when you vote for these fake, hollow political machine candidates, you're giving them a quantum of your, voluntarily giving them a quantum of your life energy. So withhold your votes. Withhold your information, your personal information from it to the extent you can. Withhold your bodies, or your body in the case of any given individual, from industrial slaughter, from the killing, the military killing machines. This means that you wouldn't work for a military agency or organizations in a civilian or uniformed capacity. And if you do, you would resign your position, because that position is incompatible with a humane existence on this planet. Likewise, if you work for a large corporation or big bank